It started in silence. In the hours before the world would change forever, the air felt still, too still for a planet that had been moving since the beginning of time. People didn't know it yet, but the fragile calm of Earth was about to be shattered, not by a storm, but by something far more terrifying, an invasion. The night had settled across the world, peaceful, as it always did. In a small town in Nebraska, the Milky Way stretched overhead, a band of stars painted against the black canvas of space. In that moment, no one could have predicted that the lights in the sky would soon be something entirely different. Jenna Walker, a mother of two, sat by the kitchen window, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of tea. The warmth from the cup radiated through her palms, grounding her in the simplicity of the moment. Outside, her children slept soundly, oblivious to the fact that their world was about to be flipped upside down. But then it came. A low hum, barely noticeable at first, vibrated through the glass. At first, she thought it was the wind. But this wasn't the wind. It was something otherworldly. Her eyes narrowed, her instincts telling her something was wrong. The sound grew louder, a low thrum that seemed to pulse with a strange energy, shaking the house ever so slightly. Jenna stood, moving toward the door, the hairs on the back of her neck standing up. And then she saw it. A light, flickering, distant at first, dropped from the sky, faster than any meteor, brighter than any shooting star. It was impossible, and yet there it was, a ship of unimaginable size hurtling toward Earth. The sheer scale of it made her stomach churn, as if her mind couldn't grasp the truth of what she was seeing. It was too much to comprehend, yet there it was, a terrible reality unfolding right in front of her. Jenna's heart pounded in her chest as she stumbled back from the door, running for her children. She found them in the darkness of their room, their little bodies curled up under the covers, completely unaware. She shook them awake, her voice frantic as she pulled them from their sleep. "Wake up, now, get in the basement, hurry." Her words were sharp, harsh, a mother's panic tearing through her voice. The children, wide-eyed and disoriented, clung to her as she guided them down into the basement. Her thoughts were a blur. Her world, once so ordinary, now felt like it was unraveling before her eyes. She had no answers, only fear and instinct, and she knew, deep down, that nothing would ever be the same. At the same moment, in the heart of New York City, life continued as usual. People crowded the streets, rushing home after long days, their minds preoccupied with the mundane concerns of life. But the moment the alien ships broke through the clouds, that routine would be shattered. The sky split open like the rending of a veil, and through it came an armada unlike anything the human race had ever imagined. Above, the lights of the city flickered for a split second, an eerie warning that something was wrong. In an instant, the heavens above erupted in a chorus of thunderous roars, as if the world was being torn apart. Buildings shook, the ground beneath the city's feet trembled, and for a moment, all sense of order collapsed. Sergeant Daniel Harris, stationed at a downtown police precinct, was the first to see it. His eyes, trained for danger, caught the brief flash of something immense, something alien, high in the sky. At first, it was so far away he couldn't even make out what it was. But as it came closer, the details became undeniable. Huge ships, too massive to be human-made, cast enormous shadows over the city, blocking out the sun. The panic started slowly at first. Screams, confusion, a feeling of helplessness that settled over the crowd like a fog. People ran, but where could they run to? The ships were everywhere, and there was nowhere to hide. The city's sounds of life, a place of endless motion, now felt deafening in their chaos. "Stay calm," Harris ordered, trying to rally the officers around him. But even his strong voice couldn't mask the unease creeping up from his gut. This wasn't a robbery. This wasn't a terrorist attack. This was something entirely different. His words were drowned by the deep roar of the alien ships as they descended, their presence impossible to ignore. For the briefest moment, he thought of his wife, somewhere in the city, and his kids. Then, All thought of self-preservation faded as the ships released their payload. The sky exploded. From the shattered ruins of a once bustling world, one man stood in the midst of it all, General Marcus Turner. He was a man shaped by a lifetime of command, a soldier in every sense of the word. And yet, as he watched the alien ships descend on his base, even he felt the weight of something he couldn't quite name. The world had always been divided. Races, countries, ideologies, religions, but none of it mattered now. The divisions of Earth were inconsequential against the backdrop of an invasion that seemed so far beyond human comprehension. The sound of airstrikes, human strikes, fired into the oncoming ships, was swallowed by the storm. Turner stood on the rooftop of a military outpost, his jaw clenched tight. For years, the world had prepared for threats. War simulations, training, exercises, everything a soldier could do to prepare. But this was beyond any training. This was real. "General, we've lost contact with the Eastern Defense Lines," came the voice over the comms. "They're breaking through. The ships are too powerful." Turner didn't answer. He couldn't. Words were futile in the face of such a brutal reality. He watched as one of the massive alien warships dropped down toward the ground. And then, with a suddenness that sent a shockwave of fear through his chest, the ship opened fire. The ground beneath him seemed to rise, and in an instant, everything he knew, everything he thought was safe, was gone. A blinding light consumed the landscape. It wasn't an explosion. It wasn't a flash of fire. It was worse. It was annihilation. As the dust settled, the city below looked like a nightmare, with crumbling structures and fires where there were once skyscrapers. The sounds of explosions were now replaced by the eerie silence of a world that had no idea how to fight back. Back in the basement of her house, Jenna held her children close, her body trembling, her mind racing. The sirens in the distance wailed, but it was no use. Earth had fallen before it could even understand the gravity of what was happening. In the silence that followed, she whispered to her children, words meant to comfort, but once she wasn't sure she believed herself. "Everything will be okay. We'll be okay." But the truth was, they were in a war, one they had never asked for, one they had never even imagined, and they would have to survive it. All of them, together. And as the world crumbled around them, humanity, fragmented, terrified, uncertain, began its fight back. It would be bloody, it would be hard, but it would not end in silence. Because humans, for all their faults, were a species defined by one thing above all: survival. And when pushed to the edge, when all seemed lost, they fought. They fought like no other. And the invaders, whoever they were, would soon learn that. It was only hours after the sky had shattered that humanity began to understand the true weight of what had happened. The streets were already covered in dust, a fine layer of destruction hanging in the air like a bad omen. If anyone had asked whether the world was prepared for this, the answer would have been clear. No, no one was prepared. The alien invaders didn't just attack cities. They tore apart everything that made those cities a symbol of human achievement. They were no longer just buildings. They were memories, dreams, hopes of what humanity could do when it worked together. In the heart of Los Angeles, where the sun would usually set in a fiery orange over the Pacific, the skyline was now eclipsed by something far darker. The once pristine glass buildings, towering symbols of mankind's ambition, now lay broken and crumbling beneath the weight of alien firepower. The city was choking on its own destruction, but amid the destruction, something extraordinary began to stir. It wasn't in the skies above, where alien ships still hovered, casting long shadows over the city. It wasn't in the ground beneath, still trembling from the impact of weapons far too advanced for humanity to comprehend. No, it was in the people, those who had survived, those who hadn't given up yet. Sarah Kane had seen her fair share of chaos. As an army officer, she had led soldiers into war zones, watched as the world crumbled in conflict, seen the best and worst of human nature. But she had never seen anything like this. She had never seen the world itself come apart at the seams. And yet, even now, she could feel the fire of defiance. not in the distant roar of artillery or the endless drone of alien crafts above, but in the eyes of those around her, the survivors. She found herself in the ruins of the Los Angeles Police Department, the walls fractured and scarred, remnants of old papers scattered across the floor like fallen leaves. The city had once been a symbol of human resilience. Now, it was a battlefield. But in the center of it all, Sarah wasn't thinking about her army training or her tactical knowledge. She was thinking about the people, the ones who would fight to protect the city, and the ones who would fight, even though they had lost everything. We can't just run. We have to fight back. The words hung in the air, spoken by a voice Sarah knew too well. Captain Mark Levinson, a man whose heart had always beat for the underdog, for the ones who had no choice but to push forward when the world told them to stop. He stood beside her, his eyes scanning the horizon, where the alien ships still loomed like a nightmare, waiting for them to make the first move. Sarah met his gaze, feeling the weight of the decision on her shoulders. The people were scared. The world was on the edge of collapse. The alien forces were too powerful, too organized. But if humanity was going to stand a chance, they needed to fight, no matter how impossible the odds. "We need a plan," she said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. Levinson nodded. "We're not going down without one." It wasn't just Los Angeles. It was everywhere. In New York, chaos had given birth to a new kind of resistance. In the rubble of the once grand city, makeshift camps had popped up, survivors banding together. They scavenged for food, for weapons, for anything that could help them take a stand. In the subway tunnels, where echoes of the past still clung to the walls, people whispered about the coming fight, whispered about what was left of humanity's will. In the heart of the chaos, Dr. Eleanor Reyes, a scientist who had once studied the stars, now found herself face to face with the very thing she had only theorized about. The alien invaders were no longer abstract entities in her research. They were here, and they were determined to wipe out everything humanity had built. "We have to do something," she told her team, her voice breaking through the clamor of the underground bunker. "We can't just wait to die. We have to fight back." Her team, a group of engineers and researchers, exchanged uneasy glances. The fight was no longer theoretical. The weapons they had created, the strategies they had devised, were all meaningless in the face of an enemy that could destroy entire cities with a single blast. But Eleanor was not about to surrender to despair. She had seen humanity's potential, its ability to push past the darkest moments and emerge stronger. If they were going to survive, it would have to be with the ingenuity that had carried them this far. "We build," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "We build until we can't. We fight with everything we have." And so they did. They worked through the nights, assembling whatever they could, a haphazard blend of human ingenuity and desperation. They didn't have much, but they had something even more important, a spark of rebellion. Meanwhile, in the ruins of Paris, a different kind of battle was taking place, a battle for the heart of humanity itself. The city had been reduced to rubble, its iconic landmarks like the Eiffel Tower broken and charred. The invaders had swept through the streets like a tidal wave, sweeping away everything in their path. But even here, in the face of utter destruction, humanity found a way to fight. In the underground bunkers, people gathered, doctors, engineers, soldiers, and survivors, fighting to keep the spirit of humanity alive. They didn't have a government to turn to, no commanding officers to follow. They only had each other, and in their unity, they found strength. Among them was Captain Aline Dubois, a French resistance leader who had spent her life fighting for the freedom of her people. Now, with the City of Lights reduced to ash, she was fighting for something much larger, the survival of humanity itself. "We will not let them take everything," Aline said, her voice strong despite the exhaustion written on her face. "This is our home. This is our fight." Her words, though filled with grief, struck a chord with those around her. People began to gather, some with weapons, some with their hands empty, but their hearts full of resolve. Together, they would make their stand. They would defend what they had left. As the days passed, the alien forces continued to press their advantage, destroying more cities, leaving a trail of death and despair behind them. But for every city they burned, for every life they took, there was another small group of survivors, picking up the pieces and refusing to let go. The invaders had underestimated humanity's greatest strength, its refusal to surrender. In the halls of what was once the United Nations, now nothing more than a pile of rubble and shattered dreams, a quiet determination began to grow. Survivors from every corner of the world, from every country and culture, came together. And for the first time, it wasn't about borders or politics. It was about something far larger. It was about survival. It was about resistance. And it was about proving, once and for all, that humanity would not be wiped out in silence. That the story of Earth was not finished, not yet. "They came to destroy us," said General Marcus Turner, standing in the wreckage of the United Nations building, looking out at the survivors who had gathered. "But they've forgotten one thing. They've never faced us before. We've survived worse than this." And in that moment, despite the broken world around them, humanity stood tall, because in the depths of their desperation, they remembered who they were. And who they were, above all, was a force that could not be easily defeated. In the wreckage of their cities, scattered among the rubble, humans were rebuilding, not just their homes, but their hearts. The fight was far from over. The alien invaders may have taken the cities, the technology, and the lives of countless innocents, but they hadn't taken the most important thing, humanity's spirit. And that, in the end, would prove to be their greatest weapon in the days that followed. Humanity was forced to reckon with the bitter reality of its survival. The cities were burning, the world was fractured, and the alien forces pressed on with relentless efficiency. The odds seemed impossible, a weight pressing down on every soul who had dared to hope. But amidst the ashes, a different kind of struggle had begun. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about something more, a quiet rebellion, the heart of humanity refusing to accept its fate. In the smoldering ruins of Earth, a flicker of determination burned brighter than any fire, and it came from an unexpected place. Dr. Eleanor Reyes sat hunched over a table in a dimly lit bunker deep beneath the streets of what had once been New York City. Around her, the remains of what might have been the world's greatest scientific minds were now reduced to a group of engineers, scientists, and survivors. They had one task, and one task alone: to build a weapon capable of giving humanity a fighting chance. "This is madness," muttered Dr. Reyes, her hands trembling as she flicked through blueprints that no longer made sense. "We're not even sure this will work." Her words fell into the quiet hum of the bunker, where the only sound was the relentless clicking of keyboards and the soft murmur of voices discussing theories, ideas, and the unspoken fear that gripped them all. No one had ever seen technology like the kind their alien invaders wielded. Their ships were like shadows, gliding through the sky with ease, leaving behind a trail of destruction. Their weapons didn't just kill, they erased. Whole cities had been wiped off the map with a single strike. And yet, here they were, a group of humans who had no idea how to fight an enemy like that, trying to build something, anything, that could turn the tide. The walls of the bunker felt like they were closing in on them. The air smelled of dust, of burning metal, of fear. And yet, despite the impossible task before them, they refused to back down. Dr. Reyes knew this was their last chance. Without a weapon that could breach the aliens' shielded defenses, humanity would be powerless. But even as she looked over the scattered plans, she wasn't sure they had enough time to finish what they had started. Up above, the world was in chaos. The skies were darkened by alien ships, ships that were constantly on the move, shifting and changing like a swarm of locusts. In places where humans had once gathered in joy and unity, now there was only silence. The invaders had destroyed not just the cities, but the very spirit of the people. Yet, in the rubble, humanity began to rebuild. If not their cities, then their will. Mark Levinson, a soldier who had once fought for peace in distant lands, now found himself leading the remnants of a broken army. He had seen loss, had seen the cost of war. But this was different. This wasn't just war, it was survival. Levinson knew the stakes. As he walked through the remnants of what had been a thriving refugee camp in the heart of Chicago, he could see the fear in people's eyes. They weren't just scared of dying. They were scared of being forgotten. The invaders were too advanced, too numerous. But still, the survivors kept coming. Some for food, some for shelter, some just to stand, to fight. "We can't afford to wait for a miracle," Levinson said, his voice low, carrying the weight of 100 lifetimes of loss. "We have to make our own." And so they did. Under his leadership, the survivors began forming groups: engineers, military personnel, anyone with skills that could be of use. They were gathering in the shadows of their broken world, waiting for the chance to strike back. But even Levinson knew they were up against something no one had ever dreamed possible. Every time they launched an attack on the invaders, they were met with overwhelming force. It was like hitting a wall that would never fall. Still, the will to fight burned in them. It always did. And sometimes, in the most unlikely places, that will found a way to endure. Back in the underground bunker, Dr. Reyes stood before a holographic display of the alien ships, her fingers tracing the glowing lines that outlined their patterns. She had seen the footage, watched as the ships swept through cities, erasing everything in their path. Nothing they had tried so far had worked. Every weapon, every defense they had developed was useless against the alien technology. But she couldn't stop. Not now. Not when they had come this far. "We need to find a way through their shields," she muttered to herself, barely aware of the eyes of her team watching her. "Their shields are perfect. No gaps, no weaknesses. We need something that can bypass them. Something unpredictable." The team was quiet. Everyone had their doubts, their fears. How could they possibly create a weapon strong enough to defeat an enemy with technology so advanced, so beyond their understanding? But Dr. Reyes, stubborn and relentless, refused to let those doubts take root. Her mind raced, piecing together fragments of ideas, bits of alien technology they had scavenged from the wreckage. She was no longer thinking just in terms of defense. She was thinking about offense. She was thinking about breaking through the unbreakable. As the hours bled into days, Dr. Reyes pored over every bit of research she could get her hands on. The longer she worked, the more obsessed she became. But it wasn't just about the weapon anymore. It was about something bigger. It was about hope. Hope that, somehow, they could turn the tide. Hope that the human spirit, stubborn, proud, and defiant, would rise once again. In the darkness of the world above, people were not waiting to be saved. They were taking what they had, what little they had left, and fighting back. In London, Captain Aline Du Bois watched as survivors worked alongside military personnel to set up a resistance base in the shattered remains of the city. They had no real army, no real weapons, but they had something more powerful: resolve. "We may not have much left," Aline said, addressing a small group of fighters who had gathered in what had once been a bustling neighborhood. "But what we do have is this: each other." Aline's words, simple but full of meaning, rang out across the camp. These survivors, broken and battered as they were, had something the invaders could never take away: their humanity. And as long as they had that, they had something to fight for. Back in the underground bunker, Dr. Reyes's eyes darted from screen to screen. Her fingers flew over the keyboard, typing commands, inputting data. She had come across a breakthrough, a theory, an idea, a thread of hope. The aliens, despite their immense power, had a weakness. It was subtle, buried deep in the way their technology functioned. If they could exploit it, if they could just build the right weapon to target it. She didn't dare believe it. Not yet. Not until she saw it work. "We're close," she whispered to herself, her voice full of wonder. "We're so close." The silence in the bunker was broken only by the steady hum of machines. The team worked in unison, drawing on every ounce of knowledge they had. If this worked, if they could build this weapon, they would have a fighting chance. The world had been changed, and its people had been broken, but they had not been destroyed. In the ruins of their cities, amidst the ashes of everything they had known, they were building something new. A new weapon, a new hope, a new fight. And no matter how many times they were knocked down, no matter how many defeats they suffered, they would not stop. The heart of humanity had always been its ability to rise after the fall. And now, that heart was beating once more. The world was broken. There was no denying it anymore. The once proud cities of Earth now lay in ruins. Their skeletal remains a haunting reminder of what humanity had lost. But even in the aftermath of such devastation, the pulse of life still throbbed beneath the surface, fragile but unmistakably human. The early morning light filtered through the cracks in the ruined buildings of New York City, casting long, jagged shadows across the streets. The sky, still scarred by the presence of the alien ships that loomed above, seemed impossibly empty, like a canvas that had been torn in two. Beneath the shadows, scattered groups of survivors began to stir. They had learned something in the days since the invasion. They had learned that survival wasn't just about avoiding death. It was about finding a reason to keep going. Dr. Eleanor Reyes stood in the heart of what was once a thriving research facility, the hum of old machines still flickering in the background. The air was thick with the smell of burning metal and the distant echoes of destruction. But to Eleanor, there was something else beneath the ashes, a quiet sense of purpose that refused to be extinguished. Her eyes scanned the room, where her team worked tirelessly, their hands stained with grease, their faces etched with exhaustion. They had all lost something: family, friends, homes. Some had even lost their will to hope. But not Eleanor. She had seen enough death, enough loss, to know that the only way forward was through the rubble. They had made it this far, and as long as they kept pushing, as long as they kept fighting, they might just have a chance. "We're close," Eleanor murmured to herself, her voice barely above a whisper. She stood before a wall of monitors, each one displaying a different part of the alien fleet, ships that, by all accounts, should have been impossible to defeat. Yet, they had found something: a weak spot, a flicker of vulnerability hidden in the design. Just a little longer. She didn't dare allow herself to feel hope. Not yet. Hope was a dangerous thing in a world like this. But the flicker of that weak spot, the possibility of a weapon that could break through the alien shields, was enough to keep her going. And if she could keep her team going, maybe they could turn the tide. Far above, in the ruins of the UN building, General Marcus Turner stared out across the barren landscape. What had once been the heart of global diplomacy now lay shattered, its broken pillars and half-sunk walls a reflection of the fractured world they had come to know. The alien ships still hovered overhead, an unyielding reminder of their dominance. But even now, amidst the despair, there was a whisper of something more, something unspoken. The survivors, the fighters, the broken people who had been left behind, they were still here. And in their defiance, in their refusal to surrender, Turner saw something humanity had always carried: a relentless will to survive. "We have nothing left," he muttered to himself. But as the words left his mouth, he felt a flicker of doubt. "We have everything left." It wasn't about weapons. It wasn't about tactics or strategies anymore. It was about something deeper, something more primal. It was about showing the aliens that no matter how many cities they leveled, no matter how many lives they took, they would never defeat humanity's spirit. Turner looked down at the small group of soldiers assembled before him. They were a mismatched collection of warriors, some young, some old, some barely trained, some veterans of battles long past. But what they all shared was the same fire, the same fury, and it was in that fire that Turner found his strength. "We've lost the war," he began, his voice hoarse but steady. "But that doesn't mean we've lost the fight." And in the silence that followed, the soldiers understood. They didn't need speeches. They didn't need reassurances. They just needed a reason to keep going. And Turner had given it to them. Back in the depths of the underground bunker, the world felt smaller, quieter. There was no sky, no looming alien ships. There was only the hum of machines and the steady rhythm of people working towards something they didn't entirely understand, but knew they had to finish. Dr. Reyes sat before a massive blueprint, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface. The weapon they had designed, Project Phoenix, was still in its early stages, fragile and untested. But there was no more time for doubts. If humanity was going to survive, this was it, the final chance. Her team had rallied behind her, driven by the same sense of urgency, of need. They worked not just for themselves, but for the millions who had already fallen, for the families who had already lost everything. There was a legacy now, an invisible chain linking them all, pushing them forward. As Eleanor's fingers traced the final design on the hologram, the door to the lab opened. A voice, low and steady, cut through the air. "How's it looking?" It was Captain Mark Levinson, his face weathered by exhaustion, but his eyes still sharp, still full of that spark. Eleanor didn't look up immediately. She couldn't. She had to finish. There was too much at stake. But when she spoke, her voice was full of the weight of what she knew. "We're close," she said again, though her words felt hollow, even to her. "Too close. But if we can just stabilize the energy flow, if we can just..." She didn't finish. She didn't need to. Levinson had been through enough battles to understand what silence meant. He stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We've all lost something, Eleanor, but we haven't lost everything." There was a quiet, almost imperceptible shift in the room, a shift from fear to resolve, from hopelessness to something more. It was a feeling Eleanor couldn't quite define, but it was there, in the air between them, thick and heavy, and it was the only thing they had left. Elsewhere, the fight was still raging. In the wreckage of Paris, Captain Aline Du Bois gathered what was left of her resistance force. They had no military support, no supply lines, no promises of reinforcements. They were fighting not just for survival, but for something deeper, for the future of humanity. "We fight because we have to," Aline said, her voice steady, even as her hands shook. "We fight because we've been through hell, and we won't let them finish the job." She looked over the faces of the fighters gathered around her, men and women who had seen their homes reduced to ash, who had lost everything and everyone they loved. And still they fought. It wasn't about vengeance anymore. It wasn't about justice. It was about defiance. It was about the simple, raw fact that humanity refused to lie down and die. Dr. Reyes stood in the control room, watching the final diagnostics. The weapon they had designed, Phoenix, was ready. She wasn't sure if it would work, but at this point, it didn't matter. It had to. And as the countdown began, a strange thing happened. The walls of the bunker, the cold, sterile walls, seemed to fade away. In that moment, it wasn't about the technology. It wasn't about the calculations or the algorithms. It was about something much simpler. It was about the collective will of humanity. "This is it," Dr. Reyes whispered, as she hit the final command. "Let's show them what we're made of." The weapon, now fully charged, pulsed to life, sending a brilliant beam of energy toward the sky. For a brief moment, it seemed as though time itself held its breath. And then, in the distance, the alien ships began to falter. For the first time since the invasion began, the world seemed to shift. It was a small victory, a flicker of light in a dark sky. But for the survivors, those who had fought, who had bled, they knew it was enough. Enough to remind them of who they were. Enough to remind them that no matter what came next, they would never give up. And that was the awakening, the first true spark of resistance. In the days following the first successful strike against the invaders, something began to change. It was subtle at first, a quiet hum that seemed to ripple through the remnants of the broken world. The survivors, battered and bruised, had always known they were on the edge of extinction. But now there was something else, something flickering just beyond the horizon of their despair. Hope. It wasn't loud. It wasn't a declaration of victory. It wasn't the sort of hope that came from certainty. It was the kind that came from defiance, the kind that, even in the darkest moments, refused to be extinguished. In the shattered ruins of New York City, where the skyline had once stood tall and proud, there were no grand parades. There were no fanfares or speeches. What was left of humanity's strength lay in the quiet determination of those who had refused to die. It lay in the makeshift camps, in the whispered promises of tomorrow, in the way the survivors held their heads high despite everything they had lost. Dr. Eleanor Reyes stood alone in the control room of what had once been a scientific center, her eyes fixed on the holographic map that sprawled before her. The weapon they had built, the Phoenix, had struck true. It had breached the alien shield, even if only for a moment. It had shown them that they weren't helpless, that they weren't entirely at the mercy of invaders who seemed invincible. But one shot, one victory, was not enough, not by a long shot. Her fingers hovered over the console, her mind racing with calculations. The Phoenix had worked, but it hadn't done enough. It had given humanity a glimmer of hope, but that hope was fragile. The alien fleet was vast, its weapons overwhelming, and the war was far from over. "We need more." Her words were barely a whisper, but in the quiet of the room, they seemed to echo. There was no going back now. If they were to survive, humanity would need to push farther, to go further than they ever had before. They would need to build more, to forge a weapon that could strike at the heart of the alien fleet, something that could turn the tide for good. Dr. Reyes wasn't sure what that weapon would look like yet, but she knew they couldn't wait. Every moment spent in indecision was a moment the invaders were using to regroup, to adapt. "We build," she said to herself, the words becoming a mantra, a rallying cry for the team that had gathered around her. "We build until we can't anymore. And when we do, we fight with everything we have." Far above, in the desolate skies that had once been filled with the familiar hum of jet engines and the promise of peace, the alien fleet had begun to shift. The invaders, though seemingly invincible, were not without their vulnerabilities, and humanity had found one. The survivors, those scattered groups that had once been called refugees, were no longer just hiding. They weren't waiting for the inevitable. No, now they were preparing. In the heart of Paris, amidst the crumbling ruins of the Eiffel Tower, Captain Aline Dubois led her resistance force in a series of covert operations, infiltrating alien supply lines, sabotaging their communications, and disrupting their efforts. It wasn't enough to win the war, not yet, but it was enough to send a message that humanity was not done yet. Aline had seen enough destruction in her life to know what it meant to lose. She had seen the faces of the innocent, the children who had been ripped from their homes, the families torn apart by war. But now, as she crouched in the shadow of a broken building, watching her comrades prepare for their next strike, she felt something she hadn't in a long time. Purpose. "We may be small," Aline said, addressing the group huddled in the makeshift command center, "but we are not weak. We are the resistance, and we will not be silenced." Her words were a spark. It was a spark that ignited the hearts of those around her, men and women who had lost everything, but who had not lost their will to fight. And as they moved into position, as they began to carry out the next phase of their operation, it became clear this wasn't just about taking back the world. This was about reclaiming something even more important. This was about reclaiming humanity. Back in the United States, General Marcus Turner had assembled his team in what remained of a military base in the heart of the Midwest. The alien invaders had shattered their ranks, broken their defenses, but they had not broken their spirit. Turner knew that the only way forward was to unify the scattered pockets of resistance, to build something stronger than just a series of isolated groups. "We fight as one," Turner said, his voice filled with the weight of leadership. "We are not divided. We are not fragments. We are humanity." His words were simple, but they carried the weight of generations of soldiers who had fought, bled, and died for their country. It wasn't about flags or borders anymore. It was about something much larger. It was about unity. It was about survival. "The time to fight alone is over," Turner continued, his eyes scanning the faces of his soldiers. "We move forward as one, or we die alone." And for the first time since the invasion had begun, there was a sense of purpose in the room. It wasn't a perfect plan. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was a plan, and that was enough. For Turner, it was a start. For his soldiers, it was everything. In the heart of New York, the resistance had taken a different approach. Rather than focusing on direct combat, they had begun to build a network, one that would allow them to communicate across the fractured remnants of the city. It wasn't much, but it was a start. In a small corner of the city, Lieutenant Sarah Kane worked tirelessly, coordinating the scattered units of resistance fighters, ensuring that each group had what they needed to survive, to continue fighting. She had seen the toll that war took on people, seen the fear, the exhaustion, the uncertainty. But she had also seen something else, the spark of defiance. "We are the spark," Sarah said to her team, her voice steady despite the exhaustion that threatened to overtake her. "We are the ones who will light the way. No matter how dark it gets, we keep going. We do not give up. Not now. Not ever." Her words echoed in the hearts of her soldiers. Soldiers who had been given little more than scraps of hope, but who still clung to them as though they were the only thing keeping them alive. Back at the Resistance's hidden base, Dr. Reyes and her team had made a breakthrough. The Phoenix, their weapon of hope, had been refined, adjusted, and was now ready for its second test. This time, it wouldn't just be a strike. It would be a full-scale assault. The weapon would target the heart of the alien fleet. It wasn't just about destroying their ships. It was about sending a message. It was about showing the invaders that humanity had not been broken, that they could be defeated. And as the countdown began, as the final sequence of commands were input into the system, Dr. Reyes felt the weight of the moment settle upon her. It wasn't just her life on the line. It was the lives of all those who had fought, all those who had given everything. "This is for them," she whispered to herself, her hands trembling slightly as she initiated the sequence. "This is for us." And as the Phoenix hummed to life, sending its pulse of energy skyward, the world held its breath. The world had been changed forever. But in the wake of that change, humanity had discovered something about itself. It had discovered that, even in the face of impossible odds, it could still fight. It could still push back. And though the aliens had tried to break them, tried to extinguish their will, humanity was still here, still fighting, still standing. And that, more than any weapon or any victory, was humanity's greatest strength. The air had thickened. It wasn't just the heavy smoke that lingered in the ruins of New York or the constant hum of alien crafts overhead. It was the weight of expectation, the electric current of something far more powerful than the machines above. Hope, once a fragile spark, had begun to take root. It was no longer just a word whispered in dark corners or a fleeting thought carried on the wind. It was now a quiet, undeniable force, shifting the momentum. For the first time since the invasion, humanity was no longer reacting. They were planning, they were preparing, and, more importantly, they were fighting. Sarah Kane stood on the roof of what was left of a high-rise, the wind carrying with it the scent of charred wood and concrete dust. It was strange, this feeling of being alive, of standing tall when everything around her seemed to be breaking apart. She could feel the pulse of the city beneath her boots, the hum of a world at war. Yet, there was something else, something deeper, something that didn't belong in the destruction. It was the sound of humanity digging its heels in, refusing to be moved. "We're not dead yet," she whispered to herself, her voice a stark contrast to the chaos below. Her fingers brushed against the cold metal of her rifle, the weight of the weapon grounding her in the moment. There was a time, before the invasion, when the world seemed endless, full of promise and potential. Now, it felt smaller, not in the way the world had physically shrunk after the alien attack, but in the way people had become more connected, more united in their shared struggle. She hadn't realized it before, but in these dark days, there was something intimate about surviving together, something that made the fight worth it. "Sarah, get down here." A voice crackled over her comms, dragging her from her thoughts. It was Mark Levinson, her trusted comrade and fellow soldier. His voice was sharp but steady. "We've got a report. The Phoenix worked, but we've got company coming in hot." The breath she hadn't realized she was holding escaped in a slow exhale. They'd done it. The Phoenix had breached the alien shields once more, allowing them to take down one of their massive ships. It was a victory, small but significant, one they had desperately needed. But now, the aliens were coming, and they were angry. "On my way," she said, snapping back into the present. As she made her way down the staircase, her mind raced. The victory wasn't enough. It wasn't nearly enough. They needed more. They needed the momentum to carry them forward before the aliens regrouped and launched a counterattack. Meanwhile, in the hidden underground labs where Dr. Eleanor Reyes had been working relentlessly, there was a new kind of energy. The Phoenix's success had ignited something inside the team. They had tested it, tweaked it, and now they were ready to build upon its foundation. "It's working," Eleanor murmured, her eyes scanning the data on the screen in front of her. "We can do this. We have to." Her team, exhausted from days of work, gathered around her. The makeshift lab was a far cry from the sterile, well-funded research centers she had once known. But here, in this dimly lit room filled with wires, glowing monitors, and the sharp smell of oil and burned electronics, she had found something extraordinary: purpose. The weapon they had built, the one that had allowed them to strike the alien fleet, was just the beginning. They could make it better, stronger, more precise, but it wasn't just about the weapon anymore. It was about the people who would use it, the soldiers who would face down the alien threat with nothing but the will to survive and the hope of victory in their hearts. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Dr. Reyes allowed herself to believe that they could win. In Paris, Captain Aline Dubois stood before a map, her fingers tracing the paths of alien ships as they moved across Europe. The resistance she had built, brick by brick, had grown stronger. They were no longer a handful of insurgents picking off stragglers. No, now they were a force, a symbol of human resistance. "They think we're weak," Aline said, her voice carrying the weight of everything they had endured. "But they haven't seen the fire we've got left." The map in front of her flickered with intelligence reports, alien movements, supply chains, weak points. Her mind was already working, calculating the next steps. Every move counted now. Every strike, every diversion, every skirmish. It all led to something bigger, a coordinated strike that could push the aliens back, force them to rethink their strategy. "We do this right, and we've got a chance," she said, as much to herself as to the group gathered around her. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for something larger than their own lives. They were fighting for the future. Back in the heart of what had once been the United States, General Marcus Turner sat in the quiet of his command center. The scattered pockets of humanity spread across the country were beginning to come together, not in grand, sweeping formations, but in the way soldiers and civilians, engineers and doctors began to find each other in the dark, sharing knowledge, pooling resources, and building something stronger than the alien invaders could ever understand. "They underestimated us," Turner said to himself, his eyes tracing the map of resistance points across the globe. "And now they're going to learn just how wrong they were." The plan wasn't perfect. No plan in war ever was. But they had a chance. They had something the aliens didn't: unity. The resistance was no longer a collection of disjointed groups. It was a movement. It was a force. "We've got one shot," he muttered under his breath, the weight of leadership bearing down on him. "But we're not going to waste it." The days that followed were a blur of strategy, preparation, and tension. Each group of survivors, each soldier, scientist, and fighter knew what was at stake. And despite the fear that gripped the world, despite the uncertainty of every move they made, they kept pushing because they had learned something important. They had learned that no matter how small, how broken, how insignificant they felt, they still mattered. Sarah Kane could feel the shift as soon as she entered the command center. It wasn't in the reports or the data streaming across the screens. It was in the way the fighters around her stood taller, in the way they spoke with more conviction. There was a spark now, and it was spreading, slow but steady, through every corner of their war-torn world. "We're doing this," Sarah whispered to herself, almost in disbelief. And then, just as quickly, she snapped back to reality. "We're doing this." The countdown to the next phase had begun. They were going to hit the alien fleet with everything they had. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about reclaiming the future, about showing the invaders that they had miscalculated. Humanity wasn't some fractured group of survivors. It wasn't a planet to be overrun. It was a force, one that had survived wars, famines, plagues, one that had faced destruction before and always risen from the ashes. Now, it would do so again. As the final preparations were made, Dr. Reyes stood in front of the console, her hands steady but her heart racing. The Phoenix was ready. The weapon that had already dealt a blow to the alien fleet was about to do so again. This time, with more precision, more power. It wasn't perfect. No weapon was. But it was humanity's best shot. As she looked around at her team, her friends, her comrades, she knew this was the moment. This was what they had been working toward. "Let's make history," she said softly, her voice full of quiet strength. And as the button was pressed, the phoenix came to life once more, its pulse of energy tearing through the sky toward the heart of the alien fleet. The tide had begun to shift. Humanity had found its spark, and this time, they weren't going to let it go out. The sky was still dark, but it wasn't the same darkness it had been. The air, thick with the scent of burning cities and the remnants of distant fires, had begun to crackle with something else, something stronger than fear, something they hadn't felt in a long time. Defiance. It was a shift, gradual and subtle, but undeniable. A quiet rebellion spreading like wildfire among the broken people who had once thought themselves powerless. Dr. Eleanor Reyes stood in the heart of what had once been a shining center of progress, her eyes locked on the readout in front of her. The Phoenix had done its job, punching through the alien shields and destroying one of their flagship vessels. It had been a victory, but not the final one. The war was far from over. The alien fleet was still out there, just as vast, just as unstoppable. But now they had a chance. She took a deep breath and glanced around at her team. They had all been through hell. Some had lost families. Others had lost everything, their homes, their identities. But here they were, still standing, still working. And in this moment, in the quiet hum of the bunker, Eleanor knew that what they were doing was bigger than anything she had imagined. This wasn't just about building a weapon. It was about building a future. And maybe, just maybe, humanity had found a way to strike back. "We're ready," she said, her voice steady, though the weight of what they were about to do hung heavy in the air. Her hands hovered over the console, the final sequence of commands pulsing in her mind. The team gathered around her, watching in silence. This was it. The weapon they had designed, the Phoenix, was about to fire again. But this time, it wasn't just a test. This time, they were going for the heart of the alien fleet. Above, in the vastness of the skies, the battle raged. The alien ships moved like shadows, swift and precise. The survivors had hit them hard, and for the first time since the invasion began, the aliens were starting to falter. It was a small crack in their armor, but it was enough. Sarah Kane crouched behind a pile of rubble, her rifle at the ready. The city was alive with movement, though not in the way it once had been. Now, it was the steady rhythm of soldiers preparing for the next fight. She could hear the distant rumble of engines, the crackle of gunfire as the resistance clashed with the alien invaders. The survivors had learned to be quick, to move fast, to disappear into the shadows before the aliens had a chance to strike back. "We've got them on the ropes," Sarah muttered to herself, though the words felt strange in her mouth. The aliens were many, their forces nearly limitless. But in these moments, when everything seemed impossible, humanity had shown it could adapt. They had become experts at finding the cracks, the weak points. She could feel the tension in the air as she surveyed the battlefield. It wasn't enough to fight. They couldn't just push back the aliens. They had to take the fight to them. They had to make sure this moment, this fragile spark of hope, didn't die out. "We fight now, or we don't fight at all," Sarah said aloud, her voice cutting through the silence as she signaled to the rest of her squad. It was time to move. In Paris, Captain Aline Dubois had been waiting for this moment, for the signs that the aliens were weakening. The strike against their flagship had made a difference, but it had also made them aware that humanity was no longer a species to be ignored. They were a threat. "We've made our move," Aline said, addressing her unit. The tension in the room was palpable. This wasn't just another battle. This was the beginning of something much larger. They had the momentum now, and they couldn't afford to lose it. "Every move counts now," she continued, her voice steady, though her mind raced. "We don't get to stop, not until they're off this planet." Aline knew the stakes. The fight wasn't just for survival anymore. It was for their future, for their children, for everything they had lost. It was the ultimate test, the moment where everything they had endured would either pay off or fall apart. But if there was one thing she knew, it was that humanity had always risen when it seemed impossible. And now, they would do it again. Back at the Resistance's hidden command center, General Marcus Turner was reviewing intelligence reports. The aliens were beginning to regroup, organizing their forces for a counterattack. He knew the coming days would determine everything. They had to strike before the invaders had a chance to fully recover. It wasn't just a matter of winning anymore. It was about denying them the opportunity to strike back. "We've hit them once," Turner said, his voice calm but intense. "Now we hit them again. Harder, faster." He glanced around at the faces of his soldiers. These were the same faces he had seen in countless other operations. But now, they were different. They were focused, determined. There was no fear left. All that was left to do was fight. And so, they would. Dr. Reyes's fingers danced across the console, her breath steady despite the weight of the moment. The Phoenix was ready. She had seen it tested before, but never like this. This time, they weren't testing the weapon. They were using it for what it had been designed to do, to cripple the alien fleet, to give humanity a fighting chance. "This is it," she whispered, though the words seemed too small for the gravity of the situation. She glanced at her team one last time, seeing the same determination in their eyes that had brought them this far. They had come from different walks of life, different countries, different backgrounds. But in this moment, they were united by something far more powerful than their differences. They were fighting for a world that was worth saving. The countdown began, a steady pulse that echoed through the bunker. Each second felt like an eternity. As the timer ticked down, Dr. Reyes's mind raced. This wasn't just a weapon. It was the embodiment of everything humanity had fought for in the last few weeks. The long hours, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, they had all led to this moment. 5-4. The room was silent now, save for the soft whir of the machines and the quiet hum of the countdown. 3-2. The weight of the moment pressed down on everyone in the room. It wasn't fear. It wasn't doubt. It was the realization that this was the turning point, the moment when everything would change, one way or another. 1. Dr. Reyes hit the button. The room seemed to hold its breath. For a moment, nothing happened. And then, fire. The Phoenix ignited, a brilliant pulse of energy tearing through the atmosphere. It was a force of nature, a burst of light that lit up the night sky, cutting through the void and slamming into the heart of the alien fleet. In an instant, the alien ships trembled. The shields that had once seemed invincible faltered, cracking like glass under the weight of the energy blast. The first ship exploded, sending debris scattering through space. It was a victory, a small one, but in this war, it was more than enough. "We've done it," Eleanor whispered, her voice thick with disbelief. "We've actually done it." But the battle wasn't over. Not yet. The remaining alien forces would come for them. They would retaliate. They would fight back with everything they had. But for the first time in weeks, Eleanor allowed herself to smile. Humanity had struck back. Above, the battle raged on. The alien fleet, reeling from the unexpected assault, quickly regrouped. But now, the survivors were ready. They weren't just fighting to stay alive anymore. They were fighting to win. And as the Phoenix's energy continued to pulse through the sky, carving a path through the darkness, they knew one thing for certain. No matter how many ships the invaders sent, no matter how many lives they took, humanity would not fall. Not today, not ever. The night had fallen, but the world had not grown quiet. It had become something else entirely. A war zone, yes, but beneath the hum of the alien ships and the clatter of resistance fighters moving through the streets, there was something deeper, a sound, almost imperceptible at first, but unmistakable. It was the sound of humanity's heart, beating, not in fear, but in defiance. Sarah Kane stood at the edge of a ruined rooftop, gazing out at the city below. It felt different now, the destruction less like a loss and more like something unfinished, something to fight through. The towering buildings had been reduced to jagged stumps, but in their shadows, people still moved. Resistance fighters, civilians, the weary and the broken, but still alive. "We're still here," she murmured, the words barely escaping her lips. She had seen it all. Families torn apart, entire cities burned to the ground, whole generations snuffed out in a blink. But now, looking at the horizon, something had changed. They had turned the tide, not because they were stronger, but because they were together. The alien ships still circled overhead, massive and foreboding, casting shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly. The threat was far from over. The Phoenix strike had been a success, but it had only scratched the surface of their enemy's might. Humanity had proven that it could fight, that it could wound the invaders. But now, the real battle was about to begin. The aliens would come for them, and they would come with everything they had. But Sarah wasn't afraid anymore. She felt it, something she hadn't in the beginning. A growing certainty that this time, humanity wasn't just surviving. It was fighting back. We fight or we die, she whispered to herself. The decision had already been made. The fight was on. In the heart of Paris, Captain Aline Dubois felt the same pulse, a quiet surge of adrenaline that rushed through her as she surveyed the landscape. The resistance had regrouped, fortifying their positions and preparing for the counterattack that was surely coming. The success of the Phoenix strike had been a rallying cry, but it was also a signal to the aliens that humanity wasn't just a dying race. They had teeth, and they were about to show them. The next strike has to count, Aline said, her voice resolute as she paced before her commanders. She could feel the weight of the responsibility pressing down on her. But it wasn't fear that gripped her heart. It was purpose. We can't afford to waste this chance. We hit hard, we hit fast, and we don't stop. Her words were met with nods of agreement, and she could see it in their eyes. The same fire that had sparked in her chest, the same defiance, the same unyielding resolve to protect what they had left. There was no going back. The war wasn't just a battle for survival anymore. It was about reclaiming what they had lost, what the aliens had taken from them. Back in the United States, General Marcus Turner had been waiting for this moment, though he'd never dared allow himself to hope for it. The Phoenix had shaken the aliens. It had opened a door, but they weren't done yet. They couldn't afford to be complacent, not when they had the upper hand for the first time in what felt like forever. This is it, Turner said, staring at the maps spread across the table. If we're going to win this, we hit them with everything we've got. The intelligence reports had come in. The alien fleet was reorganizing, moving quickly to consolidate their forces. They were preparing for a counteroffensive. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that humanity was no longer fractured, no longer hiding. We're not just defending anymore, Turner said, his voice steady, his gaze sharp. We're attacking, and we're doing it together. He looked around at the faces of his officers, the soldiers who had fought beside him since the first days of the invasion. Some were young, some had seen too many battles, but all of them were here, now, in this room, ready. They weren't fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for the future. At the hidden underground labs where Dr. Eleanor Reyes and her team had worked tirelessly, the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. The Phoenix had been their first victory, a glimmer of hope that had surged through the resistance like a beacon. But the aliens were learning, adapting, and now the weapon had to evolve. We need to do better, Dr. Reyes said as she scanned the data. The Phoenix had done its job, but the aliens were too resilient, too well defended. We're not just making a weapon anymore. We're making the key to survival. Her hands moved quickly over the console, inputting commands, adjusting parameters. The next phase was underway. The Phoenix was evolving, but it was more than just a weapon. It was a symbol, a manifestation of humanity's defiance. And Eleanor wasn't about to let it falter. This is our chance, she whispered, more to herself than anyone else in the room. We're going to finish this. Her team worked in silence, the weight of their mission pressing down on each of them. The alien threat was still looming, still hovering over them like a storm cloud. But they could feel it, that familiar pulse of resistance. It was growing stronger by the day, and Eleanor knew that no matter how dark the world became, they could not, and would not, be extinguished. As the hours passed, the tension only grew. The alien fleet was regrouping, the first signs of their retaliation already in motion. But this time, they were met with something new. This time, humanity was ready. Sarah Kane's squad moved through the city like ghosts, taking up positions, preparing for the inevitable clash. The alien forces were advancing, vast, cold, methodical, but the resistance was no longer cowering. They weren't running anymore. They were meeting the enemy head-on, fighting back with everything they had. Ready, Sarah muttered to herself, tightening her grip on her weapon. Let's give them a fight they'll never forget. She could hear the distant rumble of the alien war machines, the ominous hum of their engines as they moved closer. But it wasn't the sound of impending doom. It was the sound of the enemy walking into a trap. The humans were waiting for them, and this time, it was the aliens who would be surprised. In Paris, Aline was already on the move, her team at her side, ready to launch the next strike. The resistance had set their sights on a weak point in the alien fleet's formation, a momentary gap in their defenses. It wasn't much, but it was all they needed. The time had come. Now, Aline said, her voice low and determined. We hit them hard. She led her unit into the heart of the battle, their weapons firing in perfect unison. It was a dance, fluid, coordinated, and deadly. The alien forces fought back with everything they had, but they were no longer the invincible machines they had once seemed. Humanity had learned. Humanity had adapted. And now, humanity was fighting with a desperation and a fury that nothing at all, could extinguish. Back at the underground lab, the Phoenix had been fully upgraded, ready for deployment. The countdown began once more. This time, the weapon wasn't just a tool for survival. It was the culmination of everything humanity had fought for. Every sacrifice, every tear, every lost life had led them to this moment. 5-4, Dr. Reyes said, her fingers hovering over the console, the air thick with anticipation. 3-2, the final countdown echoed in the silence. 1, and then the Phoenix fired again. The skies above the alien fleet erupted in a blaze of energy, a brilliant pulse that tore through their ranks. This time, it wasn't a small victory. This time, the Phoenix didn't just scratch the surface. This time, it shattered their defenses. It punched through their shields like they were made of paper, hitting the heart of their forces with devastating precision. And for the first time since the invasion began, the alien fleet seemed to stumble. Humanity had struck back, not just with weapons, but with something far more powerful, their will to survive. The battle was far from over, but for the first time in what felt like forever, the alien invaders knew they weren't facing an easy victory. This wasn't just humanity's fight. It was the fight of a lifetime. The sky was heavy, a deep slate gray that seemed to press down on the earth with a weight that wasn't just atmospheric. It was the weight of all the battles yet to be fought, the struggles still ahead. Even the air felt thick, as though the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable clash. The alien fleet, reeling from the Phoenix strikes, had regrouped, and they were coming in full force. There was no denying it now. This was the final push. Everything they had worked for, everything they had fought through, would culminate in the next few days. Victory was within reach, but so was total annihilation. Sarah Kane stood at the edge of the wreckage that had once been a bustling street, the landscape now a tangle of twisted metal and shattered concrete. The city she had once called home was barely recognizable. The faces of the people who had lived here, the families who had known this place as a sanctuary, now only existed in the memories of those who had survived. Her fingers clenched around the hilt of her rifle, the grip cold and familiar. She had fought in countless battles, but this one felt different. There was no longer any question in her mind. The war wasn't just about survival. It was about reclaiming everything they had lost. This wasn't about holding on. It was about taking back the world. They're coming, she muttered to herself, the words heavy with the understanding of what lay ahead. She wasn't just talking about the alien invaders. She was talking about humanity's own future, a future that would either burn or rise from the ashes. The faint hum of alien ships overhead broke her from her thoughts. The invaders had made their move, but for the first time, Sarah didn't feel that familiar pang of dread in her chest. Instead, it was something else, something fiercer, a steady, burning fire that had grown within her since that first battle, a fire that had spread, catching hold of the resistance, catching hold of the world itself. The humans weren't just fighting to survive. They were fighting to win. Let's make them regret this, she whispered, a promise as much as a statement. In Paris, Captain Aline Dubois sat alone in the darkened command center, the quiet hum of machinery her only company. The room was filled with maps, plans, and an intricate web of intelligence. The alien forces had regrouped, and the next strike would come soon. It wasn't just about hitting them again. It was about delivering a blow so devastating that they would have no choice but to rethink their approach. "This is it," she said softly, almost to herself. "The moment we changed the game." Aline had seen the death toll rise, seen the carnage of the first few days of the invasion. She had held the hands of children who would never see another sunrise. She had seen the faces of the dying, men and women who had given everything, who had fought until their last breath, all in the name of a future that seemed so distant. And now, she could feel that future just beyond the horizon. "We won't be slaves. Not again. Not ever." Her words were a rallying cry, a battle hymn that stirred something in the hearts of those around her. The resistance had become more than just a group of survivors. It had become a movement, a force, and Aline was its beating heart. The resistance had built something extraordinary in the ruins of Paris. They had turned what was once a city of decadence into a fortress of hope. The alien invaders had underestimated humanity's ability to adapt, to endure, and most importantly, to fight back. "They'll remember the day they underestimated us," Aline muttered, her gaze sharp and unwavering. "They'll remember our names." Across the ocean, General Marcus Turner stood before a war table, his fingers running over the intricate details of the alien fleet's movements. They were on the verge of launching their final assault, and humanity had to strike first. The Phoenix had dealt a devastating blow, but now they had to finish what they had started. They couldn't afford to wait for the aliens to organize and come at them with everything they had. They had to take the fight to them. "This is it," Turner said, his voice as calm and collected as ever. But there was an unmistakable edge to it, an urgency that couldn't be ignored. "We push now. No holding back. If we hesitate, it's over." His eyes scanned the faces of his officers, the soldiers who had fought beside him for so long. Each one of them had seen the world fall apart. Each one of them had lost friends, family, and loved ones. But here they were, still standing, still fighting. "We don't die today," Turner said, his words carrying a weight that made every soldier in the room straighten their backs. "We're going to take the fight to them. And when this is all over, we're going to bury the bodies of the ones who thought they could destroy us." Back in the hidden underground lab, Dr. Eleanor Reyes was running the final diagnostics on the Phoenix. It had already proven itself once, and now it was ready to do more. The alien fleet was massive, but they had a secret weapon, a weapon that could take them down if it hit the heart of their operations. The Phoenix wasn't just a one-time success. It was the key to the future. "This time we don't just break through their shields," Eleanor muttered, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "This time we end it." The plan was simple. Target the core of the alien fleet with all the power they had. The Phoenix would be their spearhead. But it wouldn't be enough if they didn't strike first, if they didn't push when they had the chance. The alien forces had already regrouped, and they were coming for the final confrontation. There was no more room for hesitation. "It's now or never," Eleanor whispered, staring at the countdown that had begun. Her breath caught in her throat. The stakes had never been higher. The resistance had to land this blow. If they failed, they would not get another chance. The countdown clock ticked down. Seconds passed, then minutes, each one pulling them closer to the moment of truth. The first wave of the alien assault hit in the early hours of the morning, a coordinated strike that shattered what little remained of their defenses. But it wasn't enough. Not this time. Humanity had prepared. The resistance had dug in, learned from their previous mistakes, and now they were ready to strike back with everything they had. Sarah's squad was the first to move. The streets had become a battlefield once more, but this time there was no fear. There was no running. They held their ground. They pushed forward, knowing that this battle was more than just about today. It was about securing a future for tomorrow. "This is it," Sarah said to her team, her voice steady and filled with purpose. "We finish this now." The air was thick with the scent of gunpowder and blood as they pushed forward, their weapons blazing as they took on the alien forces head-on. They fought in the shadows, taking down one enemy at a time, their movements synchronized, their resolve unshakable. Every shot, every kill, was another step toward reclaiming what they had lost. In Paris, the ground trembled beneath Aline's feet, as the first wave of alien ships descended. She stood at the front of her unit, the weight of her command settling on her shoulders. There was no fear in her eyes, only fire. "This is it," she said again, her voice quiet but certain. "The world is about to change." And then, without another word, she signaled the attack. The resistance moved as one, launching everything they had at the alien fleet. The air was thick with the sound of battle, the roar of gunfire, the screams of the dying, the hum of alien ships overhead. But Aline felt none of it. She felt only the drive to fight, to protect, to ensure that humanity had a future. The Phoenix fired again, its pulse of energy lighting up the night sky. It was their last, best chance. Dr. Reyes held her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. The alien fleet was huge, their forces almost overwhelming. But humanity had a secret weapon, and it was about to deliver the blow that could change everything. The energy blast tore through the alien defenses like paper, its sheer force obliterating ship after ship. The aliens were reeling, their forces scattering, retreating into the void. Humanity had struck with everything it had. The battle wasn't over, but the invaders had been hurt. They had been made to bleed. In that moment, as the Phoenix's energy continued to blaze through the sky, something shifted. The world, broken and battered as it was, held its breath. Humanity had been brought to the brink, but now they were fighting back, not just for survival, but for everything they had ever dreamed of. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, humanity could see it, stretching out before them like a distant but attainable horizon. And they would reach it. The ground trembled beneath their feet, a dull, ominous vibration that carried with it the pulse of impending destruction. The alien forces had regrouped after the Phoenix's devastating strike. Their monstrous ships now spread across the skies like dark clouds, casting their long, menacing shadows over the battered earth. But beneath those shadows, a fire had sparked. A quiet, unyielding defiance had risen among the survivors. And it was this fire, this resolve, that would be their salvation. Sarah Kane stood at the front of her squad, looking out at the horizon where the alien fleet loomed. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest, but she was no longer afraid. The fear that had once held her in its grip had long since been replaced with something far more powerful: determination, hope, and something else, something raw and primal. "This is it," she said, her voice steady as she scanned the wreckage of the city below. "No more running, no more waiting. We stand or we fall. Together." The squad nodded, each of them silently acknowledging the gravity of what lay ahead. The world had been brought to its knees by the alien invaders, but it wasn't the destruction of the Earth that was their most devastating weapon. It was the destruction of hope, the idea that humanity, no matter how resilient, was destined to be wiped away. But they were wrong. They had underestimated humanity's capacity for defiance. And now, the resistance had grown into something more, something unstoppable. The war wasn't about survival anymore. It was about reclaiming everything they had lost. It was about fighting for a future. Across the ocean, in Paris, Captain Aline Dubois paced in the command center, her eyes locked on the display screens. The alien fleet was preparing for their final assault, and the world was holding its breath. But this time, there was no fear in Aline's chest. There was only the cold, unshakable knowledge that they had no choice. They had to win. They would win. "They can't take everything from us," she whispered under her breath, more to herself than anyone else. "Not this time. We're going to take the fight to them, and we're going to finish it." Her words were a quiet promise, a vow. The resistance had been fighting for years, each day harder than the last, each loss heavier than the one before. But Aline knew that they were ready. They had learned, adapted, and now they were armed with more than just weapons. They were armed with purpose, with a reason to fight that the aliens could never understand. Back in the United States, General Marcus Turner stood before a table filled with battle plans, his fingers tracing the lines of the alien fleet's movements. The map was dotted with red markers, signaling the alien presence. But now, there were new markers, green ones, scattered across the world, symbolizing resistance strongholds, survivors, and small victories. "This is it," Turner said to his officers, his voice calm but heavy with the weight of their mission. "We've done the impossible, but now we do what they never thought we could do. We take back the world." The room was filled with nods, silent acknowledgments from those who had fought alongside him for so long. It wasn't just about revenge. It wasn't even about justice. It was about something more primal, more human. It was about reclaiming the dignity that had been stolen from them, the dignity they had fought so hard to preserve. The plan was simple: strike hard, strike fast, and don't stop until the alien fleet was no more. The Phoenix had delivered a devastating blow, but it hadn't been enough. The resistance needed to push through, to deal the final, crushing strike that would send the aliens fleeing back into the darkness from which they had come. Dr. Eleanor Reyes stood before the massive console, her fingers trembling as she input the final commands. The Phoenix had proven itself once more, but now they were tweaking it, amplifying its power. They had only one shot at this. "If we hit them with this," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion, "this could be it. The end." Her eyes flicked to the clock ticking down. Time was slipping away. She didn't have the luxury of second guesses. Humanity had fought too hard, sacrificed too much, to falter now. The weapon was ready. The plan was in motion. They just had to hold on long enough to deliver the final blow. And for that, Eleanor would need every ounce of her courage. "We won't stop," she whispered, clenching her fists. "We fight until the end." The first shots were fired in the early hours of the morning. The sky lit up with flashes of energy as the alien ships descended in waves. The earth shook as they landed, their massive war machines stomping through cities and fields, leaving destruction in their wake. But the resistance was ready. They had learned how to fight, how to adapt, how to outsmart the invaders. And now, it was time to show the aliens what humanity was made of. Sarah's squad was the first to engage, charging forward with the confidence of soldiers who had nothing left to lose. They moved with precision, their rifles barking as they opened fire on the alien forces. They weren't just firing blindly. No, they had learned. They knew where to hit, where to aim, and how to make each shot count. "Hold the line," Sarah shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We don't let them through." The squad fought like they were part of something bigger, something more important than their individual lives. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for the future of the world. And every time they fell back, they came right back with renewed strength. The aliens might have had the firepower, but humanity had something they didn't: the ability to get up again, to keep fighting, no matter the cost. In Paris, Aline led her unit into the streets, the sounds of battle reverberating through the buildings around them. The alien ships were everywhere, hovering above, firing down on the resistance with brutal precision. But the resistance was ready. They were prepared for this moment. "We fight now," Aline said, her voice low and powerful. "We fight for everything we've lost, for everything we will lose if we don't stop them." With a single command, they moved forward, weapons blazing. The resistance fought through the streets, taking down alien soldiers, destroying their machines, and pushing back the invaders with every ounce of strength they had left. There was no fear anymore, just a relentless drive to push forward, to finish what they had started. And then, the signal came. The Phoenix had been activated. The final weapon, the one they had all put their faith in, was ready. Dr. Reyes's hands flew across the console as the weapon powered up. It was their last hope, the only thing that could turn the tide of the battle. The countdown began, each second a small eternity, each moment a step closer to their fate. The Phoenix, now fully enhanced, pulsed with energy, its bright, searing light cutting through the sky like a beacon of defiance. "This is it," Eleanor whispered as the countdown reached 0. "This is the end." The energy of the Phoenix surged through the sky, tearing through the alien fleet with a force so overwhelming that the heavens themselves seemed to shake. Ships that had once been invulnerable exploded in brilliant bursts of fire. The alien forces, once so certain of their victory, faltered. They couldn't respond fast enough. They couldn't adapt in time. And just like that, the tide had turned. Sarah stood on the battlefield, watching as the alien ships, crippled and broken, began to fall from the sky. The resistance had done it. They had taken back what was rightfully theirs. "We won," she said, her voice quiet, almost a whisper. But Aileen's voice cut through the silence, fierce and full of conviction. "Not yet," she said, her eyes narrowing. "Not until they're all gone." In the heart of the final battle, the alien forces began to retreat, their once imposing fleet crumbling under the weight of humanity's relentless push. The war was far from over, but the aliens knew they had lost. They knew humanity would never surrender, never bow to invaders again. In the end, it wasn't just about the weapons or the strategies or the battles fought. It was about the will of humanity, the will to survive, to fight, to protect everything that was worth saving. And as the last of the alien ships fell from the sky, the survivors stood together, knowing that this was only the beginning. The future was theirs,